How can you predict things? Well, you can't. Thanks a lot. Okay. You can glean information. You can research. You can find out things that maybe lots of people don't necessarily know, and you can see a trend, and you can have a scenario of 10, 20, 100,000 outcomes and then predict the most likely ones. But again, they're predictions and they're never true. And just so you know, if someone is predicting something and the more certain they are about it, the less you should trust that person. And the further out that they're predicting the thing, the even less you should trust them, because you can sort of predict things in the short term based on, enough researched information, as long as things aren't volatile, right? If you're in a short term point, whether it's a quarter or a month or a week, a day or whatever, if things are volatile in that system, then prediction becomes next to impossible. And then even if things are relatively stable, the further out you try to go from the point you're at, the less likely your prediction will be true, especially if you have less possible outcomes in that thing. So basically, if you have a volatile system and you move further out from it and you have less possible outcomes that you're predicting, then the more likely you are to be wrong about that thing. You can mitigate the short-term volatility if there's stability, and you can mitigate by being closer to the time period that you are and not going too far into the future. And then you can mitigate by having more possible outcomes that you think could happen and picking a collection of the most likely and then acting according to that, right? So, and this is also why a lot of things happen in the market, and why a lot of volatility happens, because of fear. And then fear feeds the volatility, and then they become this cycle of people are afraid to act because they don't know what the future will be, and therefore the volatility starts to increase, and then you start to have massive losses in value from whatever thing it is, whether it's products or whether it's stocks or bonds or cryptocurrencies or, I guess, sealed magic boxes or whatever. The volatility leads to a loss in value. Sometimes the volatility leads to an increase in value when people become exuberant. So that means that they're more confident about the future, right? And so people are making predictions in their heads, what they think is going to happen, and they're basing it just on their daily lives. And if they feel confident that in the future things will be better, well, then values will start to rise. And the volatility will cause that rise in value. Or it'll be, I guess, a precursor to that rise in value is better to say, rather than cause the rise. The cause of the rise in value is the exuberance. And then the opposite happens with fear. People are afraid of what's going to happen in the future. Therefore, they think they are going to be less well off. The volatility then leads to a decrease in value across the board. And then, and both of those systems feed on each other. The increase in value leads to more exuberance, and the decrease in value leads to more fear, right? And at some point, the exuberance becomes fear because there's too much volatility, even though there's an increase in value. And suddenly the people that were exuberant think they were wrong about the future, and now things are going to go bad. And then you move into the fear territory. And the opposite happens with people being in fear, and suddenly their fears didn't manifest and enough time had passed by. This is usually how this happens. They think things are going to be terrible, and then they turn out not to be as terrible. They're not good, but they're not as terrible as they thought, and suddenly they're not as afraid anymore, and maybe the future will be better than they think, and then they move into exuberance. So that's just, I guess, a PSA about people predicting things. If people are confidently predicting the future far away in a volatile system and only offering one outcome or a few outcomes, then don't trust those people. And if they do that a lot, just don't even consume their content. I mean, they are literally just throwing darts and saying those darts are, expert analysis, right? And even expert analysis can't really predict the future. No matter how much time and money and how many people, man hours are spent on predicting the future. I mean, there's the old adage or whatever of, just having a cat choose your stock picks as opposed to all the analysts at whatever bank, right? Because those types of analysis are mostly for internal use, and their external use isn't necessarily as valid. Internally, they could probably be more useful because those people are sort of, interacting with each other. But in a written or video or any media form to the public, when they're not part of the system, they become next to useless. And you shouldn't really take them, as a Bible of what to do. Now, if you take enough analysis across the board and use that information to come up with your own opinion and base it on where the volatility is, how far out it is, how many possible outcomes there are, and then you decide for yourself, you could make good decisions that will be beneficial in the future. And this is kind of how people do it. And one of the main ways is by taking the least risky option, even if there's an option that has a much larger upside but has more risk. It's better to take the less risky option that doesn't have as much of an upside. And that's how it seems the wealthy and successful do it, is that they look at what they could lose as opposed to what they could gain, unless, of course, what they could lose doesn't matter, right? And then it becomes less risky for them, more risky for other people. And that's another thing, is that these analysts, what is risky for them is not the same as what's risky for you, which is why you have to take, I guess, a meta approach and look at as much analysis as possible before making a decision. And people can do this relatively quickly. Our minds are pretty great computers, right? And if you're not certain of something, one of the possible choices to make is to do nothing, right? And that is something that people don't really teach, is that if you can't make a decision about something or you're not certain about the outcomes, then don't do anything and wait until market conditions change, and then make a decision if you think you now have an idea about what the better decision is. And not enough people teach do nothing, right? And I'll put it up here, this video about Jaws and the Noble House. And I just like this idea of waiting until market conditions favor you as opposed to acting just for the sake of acting. Anyway, that's what I think about it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have a good day.